Morales, and I call this regular board meeting of October 24th to order. The time is 5 o'clock p.m. I'd like to remind everybody to please silence their electronic devices. We acknowledge the land on which we gather is the territorial homelands of the Nuwu, the Mawapa Band of Paiutes, and the Las Vegas Band of Paiutes. Okay. Before I turn it over to Trustee Zamora to lead the Pledge of Allegiance, I want to acknowledge our students who are here in the room with us. El Dorado School ROTC, that's Cadet Petty Officer, 3rd Class, Denali Venezuela. Cadet Seaman Apprentice Alfredo Aguilar. Cadet Seaman Apprentice Emily Maca. Lead Cadet Ensign Kimberly Maca. Led by the instructor, United States Navy Senior Chief Petty Officer Dean Sari, retired Naval Science Instructor. Trustee Zamora.
Please stand.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Trustee Sparse, I'm going to turn it over to Trustee Sparsa-Strofican, who will make the motion to approve the agenda.
Thank you, Madam President. Members of the board, I'd like to make a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
Thank you, Trustee Sparsa-Strofican. Trustee Guzman.
I second.
Thank you, Trustee Guzman. Colleagues, we have a motion by Trustee Esparza-Strofican, followed by Trustee Guzman. Please cast your vote. Great, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to the consent agenda. Before I open the consent agenda, if anybody who would like to provide public comment in this section, please submit your yellow card. Otherwise, once we begin public comment, we will no longer accept yellow public speaker cards. Okay, we'll begin with individuals who signed up in advance. Is Mr. Walter Jones present? Okay, I believe that concludes public comment. Colleagues, I'm looking for action on the consent agenda. Trustee Cavazos?
Thank you, Madam President. At this time, I would like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda and also just add in congratulations to El Dorado Principal Christina Brockett for our nomination to have her become a member of the NIAA Board of Control.
Thank you, Trustee Cavazos. Trustee Guzman?
I second.
Thank you, Trustee Guzman. Colleagues, we have a motion by Trustee Cavazos, a second by Trustee Guzman. Please cast your vote. Thank you, colleagues. The motion passes 6-0. We're going to move on to the warrants. All right, I'll turn it over to Trustee Guzman, who will read the warrants.
Thank you, President Garcia Morales. Our ratified warrants as listed in the bills payable, transmittal, and board memorandum number 07-24-25 in the total amount of $295,143,801.04.
Thank you, Trustee Guzman. Colleagues, we're going to move on to item 3.01, trustee and superintendent business items. This is a presentation on the Nevada Educator Performance Framework. This is an action item, so if you would like to provide public comment on this, and if you haven't signed up for it in advance already, please submit your yellow public speaker card. Otherwise, once we begin the presentation, we will no longer be accepting public comment on this item. Okay? All right. Let's go ahead and get started. Where do we begin? At the beginning. Yeah, okay.
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Dr. Larson Mitchell, Roanne Triana, Chief Human Resources Officer, for the record. Joining me this evening is Dr. Eric Skramstad, Director of Professional Growth System and Nevada Educator Performance Framework Department. He also serves as our CCSD NEPF liaison to the Nevada Department of Education. In accordance with NRS 391.485, the Board of Trustees of each school district shall annually review teacher and administrator evaluation implementation pursuant to the statewide performance evaluation system. And now, Dr. Skramstad will now present you the item 3.01, the 2023-2024 NEPF evaluation system implementation.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell. For the record, my name is Eric Skramstad, Director of the PGS and NEPF Department and CCSD NEPF Liaison to the Nevada Department of Education. The 23-24 Nevada Educator Performance Framework Evaluation System implementation is being presented this evening. The NEPF history is provided here. Notably, the implementation of and updates to the NEPF in each legislative session. The NEPF is revised based upon Teachers and Leaders Council, otherwise known as TLC, recommendations to the State Board of Education and through legislative actions. CCSD implementation monitoring of the NEPF by NDE is based on compliance to NRS and implementation data provided at the end of each school year or reporting cycle. No changes were made during the 23 legislative session that impacted the NEPF. However, during the 21 legislative session, there were revisions to the NEPF implementation process effective for 21-22. June 21 legislative changes to AB 57 removed the student learning goal from the evaluation process for the 21-22 school year, and AB 266 marks the inclusion of the class size ratio adjustments to teacher evaluations if their student ratio is higher than the NDE recommended class size ratio. This class size ratio adjustment specifically impacts post-probationary teachers who are rated effective or highly effective on their traditional evaluation and excludes probationary teachers and those post-probationary teachers who are rated developing or ineffective or who teach band, choir, or orchestra. Implementation of the NEPF evaluation cycle is prescribed by the NDE NEPF protocols. The evaluation cycle is a 5-step process for both teachers and administrators. The NEPF implementation timeline is aligned to the district's school year and instructional days, as per NRS and the NDE NEPF protocols. The first observation cycle is comprised of the first 40 days of instruction with students. The second observation cycle occurs between days 41 and 80 of instruction, and the third observation cycle occurs between days 81 and 120 days of instruction with students. The NEPF for both teachers and school administrators is comprised of 3 domains that include standards and indicators for the 23-24 school year. The teacher instructional practice standards and indicators measure student parameters while delivering instruction in the classroom and monitoring student engagement. The professional responsibility standards and indicators address what a teacher does outside of instruction to influence and prepare for student learning and to promote the effectiveness of the school community. The student performance domain is comprised of the student learning goal. For administrators, the instructional leadership standards and indicators set parameters for measuring administrator instructional leadership attributes while monitoring teacher performance. The professional responsibility standards and indicators address administrator responsibilities for supporting or improving teacher practices, as well as providing the structural supports to ensure teacher success. The student performance domain is comprised of the student learning goal. The teacher instructional practice domain is assessed through 5 standards. Standard 1 is measured through 4 supporting indicators. Standard 2 is measured through 4 supporting indicators. Standard 3 is also measured through 4 supporting indicators. Standard 4 is measured through 3 supporting indicators. Standard 5 is measured through 4 supporting indicators. In total, there are 19 indicators that assess the instructional practice domain for teachers. The teacher professional responsibilities domain is assessed through 5 standards. Standards 1 through 5 are each measured through 3 indicators. In total, there are 15 indicators that assess the professional responsibilities domain for teachers. The school administrator instructional leadership domain is assessed through 4 standards. Standards 1, 2, and 3 are each measured through 4 indicators. Standard 4 is measured through 3 indicators. There are a total of 15 indicators that assess the instructional practice domain for school administrators. The school administrator professional responsibilities domain is assessed through 4 standards. Standard 1 is measured through 4 indicators. Standard 2 is measured through 3 indicators. Standard 3 is measured through 4 indicators. Standard 4 is measured through 3 indicators, and in total, there are 14 indicators that assess the professional responsibility domain for school administrators. The student performance domain is centered upon the development and assessment of a student learning goal, otherwise known as an SLG. The SLG is focused on alignment to NVACs and represents student learning over time. SLG scores are determined by the evaluator and educator based upon a scoring rubric of 1 to 4, with 1 being the lowest score where insufficient impact is demonstrated on student learning, and 4 being the highest score with evidence of high growth and high impact for identified students. The teacher and administrative summative evaluation ratings are weighted the same. Teachers and school administrators in years 2 and 3 of probationary status and those in post-probationary status receive the summative evaluation rating tool. The student performance domain for 2023-2024 was weighted at 15%. Teachers and administrators in their initial year of probation received the educational practice only summative evaluation. The weighting of instructional practices and leadership standards is higher than the professional responsibility standards. The summative evaluation rating weightings have varied throughout the NEPF implementation history. The domain weightings are at times adjusted based upon the outcomes of legislative sessions and are outside the control of local education agencies such as CCSD. The final scoring ranges used to determine the final rating for educators is the 23-24 school year were recommended by the Nevada Department of Education, Teacher and Leader Council, and approved by the State Board of Education for 2021-22 and beyond. During the 23-24 school year, a total of 14,886 teachers were evaluated on the NEPF. Of those, 461 were exempt from receiving the full summative evaluation per NRS 391.690. This statute states that any educator being evaluated on the NEPF who received a highly effective evaluation for 2 consecutive years will be exempt from receiving a full summative evaluation rating the following year. We had 2,165 employees that were highly effective, 11,937 that were effective, 56 that were developing, and 20 that were ineffective. The percentages are shown to compare with the administrator evaluation ratings that will be shown next. During the 23-24 school year, there were a total of 807 administrators evaluated on the NEPF. Of those, 10 were exempt from receiving the full summative evaluation per NRS 391.690. There were 84 highly effective administrators, 710 that were effective, 2 that were developing, and 1 that was ineffective. In comparison, non-NEPF administrator ratings are provided here. Of note, there were no central office administrators who were rated minimally effective or ineffective for the 23-24 evaluation year. This concludes the implementation presentation of the NEPF 23-24 evaluation system in CCSD.
Great, thank you very much. Colleagues, I'll turn it over to you for questions and/or action to approve the presentation. Trustee Guzman?
I need to set my timer. Hold on a second. I apologize. Okay.
Thank you.
I have quite a few questions, but I only have 3 minutes. So, again, I am going to start hashing on inter-rater reliability. We had 14,000 educators and only 56 are developing and 20 are ineffective. So my question is, how many times are principals put through inter-rater reliability training, and when do we assess that?
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, for the record, Eric Skramstad, Trustee Guzman. I do not have a specific number for how many times inter-rater reliability training was provided in 23-24. There were 181 different CCSD NEPF trainings that occurred throughout the year,
Okay.
but which ones were specific to inter-rater reliability, I do not have at this time. But I could research that and provide information at a later date.
Oh, that would be great. And then I want to have the same information for the principals because there are only 2 developing and 1 ineffective principal. I would like to know how many trainings the SAS receive on inter-rater reliability and that follow-up also, because I just feel like I would love to believe that that was true. I would love it. So if you could get that to me, that would be great. And one, I noticed that you gave us the central office, and that is fantastic. I appreciate it. It's the first time since I've been a trustee, so I appreciate the information. I'm wondering if next time you do it, if you could also include the support professionals. We've never had a presentation on the support professional, their evaluations and how they're doing. And as trustees, we need to support all of the staff. So please, thank you.
Thank you.
I made it.
You made it. You made it with 3 minutes and probably some to spare. Cool, great, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Trustee Sparsa-Strofican.
Yes. So can we go back to the slide that had the percentages? We had briefings, and I let the team know that I was going to ask these questions because I think it's important for us to do comparisons. So the one thing that I want to point out is the exempt. What does exempt mean? People would not understand, like, who's exempt and why. So could you answer that first, then I'll go to the next one that we talked about.
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, for the record, Eric Skramstad, Trustee Esparza-Stafford. In relation to exempt teachers or administrators, the requirements are the same. It must be a post-probationary employee that for the 2 consecutive years prior to the exemption were both post-probationary and also rated as highly effective on their evaluation to have the opportunity to be exempt. And on top of that, it's at the supervisor's discretion to provide the exemption. So there may be times in which an employee was eligible for the exemption but did not receive it based upon the supervisor's discretion to do a full evaluation instead. So those people that did get the exemption were provided that opportunity from the supervisor and also from the 2 prior years of highly effective conduct or evaluation ratings.
Thank you. I believe it's Dr. Scramston for that. So my part 2 to that, which is tied to it, is I want to see in the future that there's trend data over time. Because of the fact that it takes 2 years, potentially, and I want to see, like, maybe we could do 3 to 5 years, and then we can see some trends with some of our staff. Are they staying exempt? Are individuals, are we moving into developing? I only ask that because of the fact of, you know, the question that Trustee Guzman was asking about the level of what kind of a trend are we seeing in the time of our leadership. So we've had some switching, some changing, some training that's necessary, but I want to see that over a period of time. So 3 to 5 years is something I would hope to see, in addition to just 1 year data and percentages. And I appreciate the end count. That's helpful, because when you look at 0.12%, that's one person that's ineffective out of 18,000, I believe. No, this is administrators. There's not 18,000. How many administrators do we have?
It was about 900 that were.
Okay, so 900, so one out of, oh, you flipped it back, sorry. So one administrator out of 900 was ineffective. So, okay, thank you for that.
Trustee Satori?
Thank you, and thank you for that presentation. My question, and I had also kind of expressed that I was going to ask for this to be discussed as well from the briefing. But my concern is just kind of the correlation with our performance and the evaluations that our staff is receiving. When I had gone to Florida to observe, I had the opportunity to observe some of their school systems, and one of the things I was asking about was their evaluation system. And they were very adamant about the fact that they have a letter grade rating, ABC, that the average of the staff, it should correlate with how the school performed. I mean, obviously, there are some high-performing teachers in schools that are not high-performing yet, but that overall, when you see it, there should be some correlation with how the school is doing to how the teachers are being evaluated and what feedback they're getting. So it's concerning to see so many as effective, when obviously our data is not there yet. We are not seeing that. Also, when I receive applications with evals, and this kind of goes to the inter-rater reliability that Trustee Guzman was speaking to, when I get applications from teachers, typically I go to their evals and it's all 3s. And I look at it and I'm just like, this doesn't tell me anything. So so my concern is, yes, I know there's training, but are we really following up with those administrators to ensure that they're putting the time in to get the evidence, to give, quality feedback to our staff? So my question would be, essentially just how can we get evals to be more reflective of, like I said, it should correlate with our performance as a district.
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Melissa Gutierrez for the record, Trustee Satori. Student achievement is just one measure. We also take into account growth with teacher effectiveness. We know from NWEA's research that our students are going to need about 6 to 9 months of additional instruction just to catch up to pre-pandemic levels. In addition to that, the student performance component of the NEPF, the SLG, is reliant upon progress, and it can be modified throughout the school year. Typically, when teachers are experiencing challenges, schools focus their resources on building capacity and coaching and providing support so that students have better experience in the classroom and we can improve student outcomes.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, who has the ball? Who has the ball? Go ahead, Eric.
I can add some additional insights.
Okay.
So, Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, for the record, Eric Skramstad, Trustee Satori. In relation to trying to match evaluation performance of our teachers and administrators with student achievement data is problematic with the NEPF. This has been known for a while, and that's in part due to the Superintendent Jara's Focus 2024 when he was here in the district. We were working with RC to try to correlate evaluation and student performance data. There were no correlations. It was unbeknownst to us that NDE had also commissioned a study with UNLV around the same time. And that study that was commissioned by NDE, there was no discernible correlations between the NEPF and student performance. So due to various concerns with the NEPF that UNLV mentioned, it was in part due to the limited rating scale. We have a score of 1, 2, 3, or 4. They could not track any of the indicators and any of the achievement metrics between the two, evaluations and student achievement. So there'd be
Problem of there has to be so many 2s for it to be that way, or so many 4s, so the law of averages tends to. So I definitely think there needs to be a wider range. Do you see any? And I'm sorry, I don't know if my time is up.
It is. Thank you, Trustee Satori. Trustee Satori, can I ask you to get back in the queue, please? Thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and jump in and then give Trustee Sparza-Strofigan a chance to jump in after, and then Trustee Satori if she'd like to go next. Please remind us, who establishes the NEPF?
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, for the record, Eric Scramstead, President Garcia Morales. The NEPF is based upon NDE recommendations that are in law, so it's part of NRS. And CCSD is in a compliance role in relation to what is legislated and what's put into law that we have to follow. And all districts in the state follow the same expectations.
This is a statewide performance framework that's established by legislation. It's written into law that the way this is established is what we will rate our performance on, specifically with teacher performance.
Correct.
Yeah. And if there are changes that need to be made to this, to the NEPF, for example, does that mean that it also needs to go before the legislature to make those changes, or can like CCSD just say, hey, we're going to just, disregard or add or change altogether?
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Eric Scramstead for the record, President Garcia Morales. The district does not make their own rules in relation to the implementation of the NEPF. We do follow what NDE prescribes, and it would have to go through the legislative process for there to be changes to be made. The state right now is implementing for 24-25 a field study in relation to a changed or modified evaluation process. The data related to that is not available yet because the school year is not concluded or the evaluation process is not concluded. But the state and the TLC work group typically make those suggestions and then move from there. There's one time in year in particular that each state or each district in the state provides feedback, which is what's called our interview with the state, and that's where we provide post-evaluation process guidance. And for the last few years, we've recommended increasing the scoring range just to try to get a better distribution curve on ratings, which would include a different rating of 1, 2, 3, 4. We could maybe have a scoring range of 1 to 10. And then have a higher level of differentiation. But all of that would have to be agreed to through the legislative sessions.
Thank you. Yeah, and that certainly would take time. It sounds like there's some work in motion already that will help address some of the concerns that have come up from having to learn how this evaluation cycle takes place. So appreciate that insight. The next, I think, question that I have more broadly is what happens when an educator or an administrator is put on, is seen as ineffective? Like, what does that yield?
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, for the record, Eric Scramstead, President Garcia Morales. There's going to be various things that would occur if a teacher administrator is identified as ineffective. It's going to depend upon their probationary status, whether they're post-probationary or not, or whether they are probationary. If they are probationary, page 17 of the NEPF protocols provides specific guidance in relation to the notifications that have to be provided to the employee, especially if they may be non-renewed from their contract. If it's a post-probationary employee, then there has to be a significant number of indicators on their evaluation that have evidence to support the reduced rating. This can be extremely problematic because it would basically mean that the supervisor is relatively camped out in the employee's setting, whether it be an administrator in their office or at their school site, or a teacher in a classroom if it's a school administrator. So getting that amount of evidence at times can be a concern, just the amount of time the supervisor has to spend with that employee, and then what type of supports are being provided to that employee at the discretion of the supervisor. Is there a mentor? Is there a peer collaboration? Are there specific trainings they should attend? Is it a PLC group at the site? So a lot of that can be based, situational based upon the concerns that are witnessed during the observational cycles with a supervisor.
Thank you. Trustee Sparza-Strofigan, you're up.
So part of the question was asked as far as, I think people don't understand, like, I'm really concerned about, like, retaining our teachers. And I think that's a different conversation. So I appreciate that, Deputy Ms. Gutierrez, you mentioned that looking at growth is something, do you know, because of the fact that I know historically the Department of Education has always included teachers in the process. When the NEPF was created, there were committees that were formed, so they had a lot of say to kind of have back in the day. Are there conversations that you're aware of that potentially growth might be something that we could look at a little bit further, not just for SLG? Has there been anything with the State Department on that?
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, for the record, Eric Skramstad, Trustee Esparza Stafford. I'm not directly aware of some of those conversations. The TLC work group organized by the state does also include teachers as well as administrators to have conversations in relation to, let's say, the weighting of the SLG and, let's say, the level of perceived importance or the importance that it has on the final evaluation and the evaluation rating. There was the understanding by the TLC work group that those weightings would stay the same because there has been a lot of change over the years. So I want to say it was in 21-22 is when they locked it into the current rate of like 65, 2015, if I remember the percentages correctly. But outside of that, I'm not aware of any other conversations at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Trustee Satori, did you want to get back in the queue? No, you're good? Okay, great. Teamwork. All right. Wonderful. Colleagues, that concludes public comment. At this time, I need to take public comment. And I do not have anyone who signed up in advance or submitted yellow public speaker cards. At this time, I'm looking for a motion or an emotion. Motion. Trustee Brooks?
Thank you, Madam President. I move to approve the presentation.
Thank you. Trustee Cavazos?
Thank you, Madam President. I will second that motion.
Thank you, Trustee Cavazos. Colleagues, we have a motion by Trustee Brooks, a second by Trustee Cavazos. Please cast your vote. Thank you, colleagues. That motion passes 6-0. Thank you. Thank you for your work. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to item 3.02. It's a budget update. Presentation discussion regarding the Clark County School District's budget. We're going to allow our team a second to settle in. Thank you. And colleagues, just as a reminder, this item was approved at our last regular board meeting. This was an item that was brought before the appeal process. Even though we had a budget item, a very comprehensive budget item I want to remind the board, we had a very comprehensive budget item last week. And at the same time, at the last board meeting, at the same time, we also had an item to appeal a request from members who wanted to add a budget item at the earlier October meeting. So here we are. All right. Thank you very much. Dr. Larson Mitchell.
Madam President, members of the board, for the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell. This evening, we will be providing a budget update. With me is Interim Chief Financial Officer Diane Bartholomew, Chief Strategy Officer Kelly Kowal-Paul. So just linking back to our presentation at the last board meeting, we just wanted to provide an update on some of those components. So looking at our preliminary conclusions, in our work over the last 2 weeks, we have found no reason to change our findings of primary issues or root causes. We remain committed to solving for insufficient process documentation and communication and organizational processes and silos. Looking at our two separate challenges, one being school budgets and the other being the potential central budget deficit. With schools are moving forward with implementing their budgets. The surplus meetings occurred on October 16th, 2024, and we are currently working on finalizing all processes aligned with surplus. In regards to our potential central budget deficit, it remains at approximately $10 million. At this time, the district plans to offset any potential central budget deficit with the unassigned ending fund balance in alignment with District Regulation 3110. Any need for the adjustment to the unassigned ending fund balance will be included in the December 12th amended final budget presentation to the Board of School Trustees. So looking at our cross-functional improvement cycle, It is well underway. Just this Monday, October 21st, we reviewed the end-to-end school budget development cycle with district leaders and principals on the extended leadership team, where we had robust, thoughtful conversations and captured some additional recommendations and wonderings to be considered as we progress. Yesterday, we met with principals on the budget committee to review the end-to-end school budget development cycle. But with this group, they dug down into individual allocation decisions. So this discussion also resulted in some additional recommendations to consider as we progress. As far as our timeline, we are on track to meet our improvement process timelines in preparation for releasing allocations in January 2025 for the 2025-2026 budgets. Also looking at external support, we do have updated information related to our external report. District team members have met multiple times with the LCB audit team and facilitate their requests for any information needed to fulfill their responsibilities. The district also looks forward to participating in a hearing held by the Interim Finance Committee's Subcommittee on Education Accountability on December 16th. The timing of this hearing is appropriate considering our process improvement work will be near completion and the amended final budget will have been presented to the board. So also looking at additional external support, we have open communication. Between CCSD, the Governor's Office, legislative leadership, NDE, and various state agencies. In response to the Governor's request regarding the Committee on Local Government Finance providing additional oversight, we shared information and had discussions with the committee yesterday on October 23rd. The committee offered the support of a subcommittee, including 3 members from the Committee on Local Government Finance, Paul Johnson, CFO of White Pine County School District, Tom Szynski, retired CFO of Washoe County School District, and Jim McIntosh, CFO of the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority and former CFO of the Clark County School District. We are really, really excited to work with them and are very grateful for their support. This week, we also furthered collaboration with NDE. On Monday, we provided responses to the second round of questions and also touched base with the department's Deputy Superintendent of Student Investment regarding our collaboration throughout the process improvement cycle. And so in conclusion, the team is assembled here again this evening, and we're happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Larson-Mitchell. Colleagues, I want to remind the public this is not an action item, so we will not be taking public comment on this particular piece. But here we go, colleagues. Trustee Barón, you're up first.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Yeah, I had an opportunity to read the questions and the answers that you submitted to the state superintendent. And the one line that keeps on coming up again and again, insufficient process documentation, insufficient process. I see that quoted in many of the answers. But that in and of itself is not an answer, with all respect. Now, I'm still trying to wrap my head around what initially we heard that caused so much consternation and panic. This 50-odd million budget deficit that seemed to shrink from 50 million down to 20 million, down to 12, then down to 10.9. So, like for instance, again, I'm trying to figure out, so how was it that we thought we had, either we did or we did not have a budget deficit in the $50 million range? Because I don't know how you go from the $50 million deficit down to 20 just by saying, no, we recalculated. That doesn't seem to make sense, okay? And again, I'm not a CPA. I'm just like many of the people who are here. I have questions, I have answers. I can balance my own checkbook, but I know if I went from $50 down to $20, I would be wondering where I lost my, where I made up, the 30 million there, or the $30. And then just like we reported again that we're at 20 million, then it goes down to 12. Well, where do we find that 8 million? I still don't have a definitive answer from you, quite frankly, how that happened. And then it gets reported, hey, well, it turns out it's not 12 million. Now we're down to 10.9. So again, we found another $1 million. So I guess maybe I'm missing something, or I can't. I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Can you please explain that process? How we move from a pretty big amount, from 50 million down to 20 million, which is probably more than I'll ever see in my own life. But again, that's almost less than half. How do these numbers change like this?
Good evening, everybody. Madam President, members of the board, Diane Bartholomew, interim CFO. So you kind of touched on this when we were here October 10th, right? We are, at the time, we're still in the process. We're still right today, still closing out FY24. We are literally probably printing out the ACFR as we speak. So there is a process with closing out the books. We're still, adjusting POs, putting expenses where we need them. We are always updating and refining the books, right? So in order to close properly for FY24. So FY24 closes out, we get an ending fund balance, and that begins our balance for FY25 budget. So that's what we're talking about right now, FY25 budget. So yes, we're still, I'm trying to explain to you, sir.
Trustee Baron, give me 1 second, actually.
Okay.
Diane, thank you. I expect that this conversation takes place in a respectful tone and manner of our staff who are also servants of this school district. And we are, again, on the same team. Okay, this is not an inquisition. This is not we're gonna gotcha. If you have questions, you're welcome to ask them. And and Diane has already provided you some responses. If you don't find that sufficient, you're welcome to get back into the queue to ask another question because your time is up. Okay, Diane, is there anything else that you need to add to that? Thank you.
She hasn't even answered yet.
Trustee Baron?
That is not an answer. There's no figures, there's no numbers, there's no reference to anything. There was nothing referenced in.
We're gonna move on. Trustee Baron?
Yeah. In the reference materials, I was expecting to
Trustee
see
Baron,
some numbers.
you won't hijack this board meeting, okay? There's a lot of work still to be done, a lot of people in the queue, and you're welcome to get back in the queue so that you can have your chance on the microphone. Trustee Zamora, you're up next.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to clarify some things that I have been hearing. Do we know how many staff positions, licensed professionals, classified positions, and administrative positions that were cut as part of the school's reconciliations?
Madam President, members of the board, for the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell. I'll ask Ms. Triana to respond. Thank you.
Welcome back. Madam President, members of the board, interim superintendent, Dr. Larson Mitchell, Roanne Triana for the record, Trustee Zamora. 36 licensed professionals were sent to surplus, meaning they were budgeted out. 41 support professionals, the same thing, and then 5 administrators.
Thank you. Another question I have is how many classes were increased? Do we know?
Madam President, members of the board, Kelly Cole-Paul for the record. There are so many variables involved in the decisions that principals have made in adjusting their budgets. We cannot answer a question about whether or not a principal removed a position because of the errors we made, or because of enrollment, or because of decisions made about instructional planning at the school. And so therefore, we also cannot answer the question about class sizes. We can do an analysis of class size from the spring budget and the fall budget. That's not something we have with us today. But attributing that class size change to the mistakes that we are presenting to you again today would be incorrect, really.
Okay, I appreciate that, just because, we already have an issue with class sizes, and then we hear, folks are being surplus, so that means students have to go somewhere, and figuring out where that is. And then my last question is, how many after-school programs were reduced? Do we have a number?
Madam President, members of the board, it's the same exact answer. Yeah.
Yeah, after-school programs, I think, was also a thing that a lot of families, I don't want to use the word, afraid of that, hearing that, right? Because I think that's one of the programs that was talked about as we were talking about the budget deficit. So, thank you.
Trustee Sparza-Strophagan?
So I first want to acknowledge the Department of Education. I really think it's important. This is such an important impact to our community because our students in the classrooms have been affected. Our staff has been affected. We just heard some of our licensed positions have been surplused, some of our support staff, and then our administrators. That process will take its course, and then we'll see where people maybe potentially will be reassigned or what that outcome might be. I want to use the document that the Department of Ed provided because I went through it with just the fine-tooth comb. On page 1, where it says at the bottom that we learned that in January 2024, allocations mistakenly included a central accounting of program management costs. I really want to know, what does that language really, what does that mean? Was there additional costs passed to the schools as a result of the deficit?
Madam President, members of the board, Kelly Cowell-Paul for the record. No, that's not what that means. What that means is there was a portion of that funding mistakenly withheld from schools. It was discovered that that's not supposed to be withheld from schools and was sent back out. So the entire allocation for weighted fundings is in schools, in the fall budgets.
So, but the schools did have to use some carryover in certain situations to fill in that budget deficit. So there was an impact to the site in that sense, correct?
Madam President, members of the board, Kelly Cowell-Paul for the record. Trustee Sparza-Strophagan, unrelated, that's unrelated to that particular statement.
Okay.
So for example, when we receive a grant, a portion of the grant is retained to fund the management of the grant. That's what we would call a program cost, right? That doesn't apply in terms of weighted. So I think, though in the fall budgets, we retained a portion centrally for management of those funds, that's not something we're supposed to do. We corrected that in the fall.
So the second follow-up question, I'll get back in the queue, is we know what the shortfall for schools are. Was there any surplus from central office? Were there any positions? Or is this inclusive, these numbers inclusive of the central office positions?
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Dr. Larson Mitchell, Rowan Triana for the record, there were none.
To central, okay.
Correct.
Thank you. I'll get back in the queue.
Trustee Guzman?
Thank you. I'm setting my timer. I think one thing that I want to make clear is the definition of surplus, because I have a feeling anybody watching us would think that we actually cut 36 teachers, 41 support professionals, and 5 administrators based on your answer. And really, when I used to assist with the surplus, we called it a redistribution so that we would move the staff to where they were needed because of enrollment changes and things like that. Could you please explain what surplus is?
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Dr. Larson Mitchell, Rowan Triana for the record. Thank you for that question. I'm glad I get a chance to clarify that. Like I said before, 36 licensed professionals were budgeted out of budgets, and 0 of those people are going to be losing a position, meaning they were, in fact, able to select another position. We are working with one situation because of a specialized license, but we're about 90% sure we're going to see that person through. In terms of the support professionals, like I said prior, 41 were budgeted out. However, 24 people selected a position at surplus. 3 support professionals resigned, 14 selected no position, and at that point, that's what triggers the bumping, right? We all hear about the bumping. And as a result of that process, we anticipate 4 people losing their position, and those 4 were hired late September, early October. So least seniority in that job family.
Okay. All right, and then, and the 5 administrators?
5 administrators were all, they're in unassigned status right now, and they have 90 days to secure a position. And what that looks like is they have to interview for those.
Okay.
And then if I could add one more thing, that's good news. When these jobs go to fly again on November 4th, these 4 people will be able to apply for a position that they're qualified for and that they're interested in.
Okay. And then when we're talking about a rolling budget, this is not like balancing a checkbook, is it? So can you explain what a rolling budget is, please? Because I know that that means, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be talking, but if you want to explain what a rolling budget is, because the numbers don't come all in at the same time.
Madam President, members of the board, Diane Bartholomew for the record. You are correct. I've never heard that term particularly that often, old school term, but that's okay. But yes, it's not technically a checkbook. We're relying from prior year closeout to begin the new year process. And that's basically it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Trustee Cavazos, who's up next.
Thank you, Madam President. I have a couple of questions here. I try to stay within my time here. Again, kind of recycling back to the, the explanation that was given about the, the insufficient process documentation and communication and organizational and process silos being like one of the foundational things, the reason for a lot of these issues right now. How were these, if we don't have those in place, I was just wondering, how were these notifications and these documentations, how were they handled in the past if we did not have anything in place?
Madam President, members of the board, Brenda Larson Mitchell for the record, Trustee Cavazos. One of the first steps that we did within the continuous improvement cycle is we asked for documentation of processes and gathered those. And based on looking at what we gathered, there was insufficient documentation to outline these steps. So we pretty much relied on knowledge within the team, but the steps and the processes were not documented thoroughly, and then there was a lack of checks and balances, and that's where we have to work more collaboratively as one team, making sure that we're not operating in silos and that we have documented steps to follow for the future, and that's what we're working on right now, Trustee.
Thank you, Dr. Larson Mitchell. So kind of piggybacking on that, so if we did not have, if we did not have the sufficient, protocols in place, are we going to have to go back and look at any of our prior budgets and how things were done?
Madam President, members of the board, Brenda Larson Mitchell for the record. We are meeting almost daily with the budget team, and as we learn new things, we are recording the documents and the processes that we need to determine how we move forward. At this point in time, we're focused on what are those lack of systems and structures and processes in moving forward, things that we've learned. We definitely corrected for the September 2024 budgets.
Thank you, Dr. Larson Mitchell. Do I have any time left? A little bit? Okay. All right. The projected timeline then for this collaboration with district leaders and principals, this is January 2025 then that we're hoping to have this in place?
Madam President, members of the board, for the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell, Trustee Cavazos, yes, we have to.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Cavazos. I see Trustee Barón in the queue. However, I'm going to go to members who have not had a chance to share, and then I'll go back to you. And so far, I see Trustee Brooks and Trustee Bustamante Adams who have not shared just yet, so I'm going to let them jump in. Trustee Brooks?
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you to the team. I know you're catching a lot of heat from everywhere, and I appreciate you navigating this with grace and composure, and I just want to express my gratitude because I don't think you hear it enough. The reality is education financing is very complicated. The questions from the board demonstrate that maybe some of us also don't have a clear understanding of how it works. I think Trustee Guzman touched on the surplus part. People are kind of mixing these two concepts together, and they're not the same. So I think it's very challenging. When you say insufficient process documentation, I take that to mean that maybe you had staff turnover and somebody had knowledge, institutional knowledge, they walked away with it, and you were left without somebody who knew how to do something. Does that sound in the ballpark?
Madam President, members of the board, Kelly Coopal for the record. Trustee Brooks, that's very much in the ballpark, and then hit out of the ballpark because that's exactly a big part of it, for sure. However, we did not include employee turnover as a root cause because we feel like it should be important for this organization to have the systems and structures in place to be able to work through employee turnover. So really the root causes are the lack of systems or processes and then those silos for sure.
Thank you. I think it's commendable that you're owning up to that because systems and processes will outlast your employees, and they should. Good, strong systems really help districts stay afloat. My question is about this financing piece. How can you go from 500 million as a deficit to 10 million? I picture it like this, and I'm not sure if this is accurate, but you're working on estimates, right? And then you have actuals towards the end of the year. You have some that come in high, some that come in low, and then you balance your books like you do a checkbook at home. Is that how this works, or is it different?
Madam President, members of the board, Diane Bartholomew, interim CFO. Yes. So like I was trying to explain earlier, yes, we're closing out FY24. We have estimates. We're truing up, right? And making sure expenses where they should be. Maybe we can put something towards a grant. Maybe we can't, so we're trying to utilize the dollars the best we can. So yes.
So just like your checkbook, sometimes something's higher, sometimes it's lower, and then at the end, you're left with how much money you either have or don't have. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Trustee Bustamante Adams?
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Interim Superintendent. It has been evident that your team has gone above and beyond to be able to answer everyone's question, NDE, the Finance Committee that was just this week, and continues the list of people who want to know, but I think it's making us better, and for that I'm grateful. I would like to ask, though, is the briefing also including legislative leadership?
Madam President, members of the board, for the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell, Trustee Bustamante Adams. Yes, we have met twice with legislative leadership on a Google Meet joined by Dr. Keating and Todd Story.
Thank you, and I appreciate you keeping them updated because they are our funder, and so we should be mindful to keep them updated on what's happening. And Diane, it does make sense to me about, actual versus budget, but it's also a new process. And so thank you for being patient with us as we're trying to understand. My other question has to do with the added recommendations to consider. You mentioned that twice, and so how will you vet that out to see which ones make sense? What's the process?
Madam President, members of the board, Kelly Cole-Paul for the record. Trustee Bustamante Adams, right now we are in collection mode for recommendations. Although our meeting with the Principals Budget Committee yesterday really started narrowing in on some things that we could take a look at by modeling out what those recommendations would look like in terms of changes to schools. We're trying to make sure that the decisions that we're considering will further our ability to provide students across the district with an equitable educational experience, which is what the law asks us to do. So we're looking to do that. That is actually a benefit of going through this experience. Because that's not an error that we discovered, but since we're here looking at the process itself, we're taking the opportunity to see if we can improve some of the decisions that we've had in place. There are a lot of decisions that seem to be rooted in some different historical processes and some different historical legislation that we need to work out. I'm grateful to have the partnership of NDE's finance team through that. They're ready to go to help us kind of comb through some of those decisions as we go as well. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go back. Oh, I see Trustee Zamora. Oh, you already shared. Yeah, I'm going to go back to the top. Trustee Baron, you're up next.
Thank you, Madam President. For the record, for the public's sake, part of my concern for this official informative discussion here is that there is no supporting documentation that's been attached to this agenda item that supports any assertions or claims that you're literally testifying to. That's a problem. And I'll come back to the 50, 20, 12, 10. But look, some numbers just don't make sense. So one thing that was testified here to was that back in January 2024, that there was supposedly a mistake in the way that the average salary for the employees was calculated out at $115,000, which did not include the 8%, which I get, okay, it's an honest mistake. And then in September, it turns out that the average salary is about $121,000. Well, I'm looking at the $5,700 times 16,500 employees, which we have, and that should have been, unless my calculator is wrong, that should have been a deficit of $94 million. So, it seems to me that the deficit that should have been reported should have been more than $50 million. Again, these seem like very nebulous numbers. Can you explain to me? Again, if we didn't allocate the $5,700, then how come the budget deficit was only in the $50 million range and not in the $90 to $100 million range?
I want to clarify that there was supplemental information that was provided to us, reference material that's provided to us at the last board meeting, and this was simply an update. Is there anything else?
That's a question, please.
And I also am answering it for you. So
No,
you can
I'm
remember.
asking it for staff. This is not a question that I'm asking to the board president. This is a question that I'm asking to staff.
With Trustee Baron, I really want to get to your question,
No,
so let's get your question
that's my
here.
question. I would like for the team to please answer it.
I've answered it. I've answered
You're
that part
not
for
the
you.
one who's supposed to be answering here. Staff is.
Maybe you should remember that we had a
No,
meeting, and we also,
this is a
I
question
wouldn't
to
have to bring
staff,
that up.
and this is something that we want, I'm sure that
Yeah,
other people want to hear, and you do not have the right to answer for them.
I'm not answering for them. I'm reminding you that you were here 2
Are you
weeks
going to let
ago.
them answer, or are you not? Please answer.
Please go ahead. Thank you. Answer whatever that question was.
no problem. Madam President, members of the board, Trustee Barone, I think what's happening is we're conflating the two issues. If we were to not have updated the school's estimated salary costs, then the schools would have overspent the district's budget. We did not do that. By allowing schools to make adjustments to their budget, those changes do not become a deficit. the amount of funds that support teacher salaries are in schools, not in central office. When principals made the decisions within their school budgets to make adjustments that resulted in the surplus processes that Ms. Triana spoke to, that is why that deficit number did not go as high as that math that you stated would suggest. That is not a reality that happened. The central office, the potential central deficit right now is an accounting exercise, as our interim CFO has shared with you, that it's completely unrelated to the increased salary cost of staff for schools.
But that was part of the explanation as to why we had it in the first place. Or unless, I heard wrong.
Thank you, Trustee Barone. That's your time. Trustee Sparza-Straffigan?
So, because I want to bring back to the fact that some of us have been here for a longer time. We've lived this kind of situation before. I want to go back to Trustee Guzman's point about the surplusing. Riffing is reduction in force, and my understanding that there are some potential individuals that are going to be reduced in force, potentially. And that does mean that potentially people could lose their positions. I'm just saying to you, speaking as an individual, I lived it. I was riffed when I was in the district. And some of our people, even if they get surplused, they will go potentially, depending on the ability of vacancies, to a different family or to a different, and I don't mean physical family, I'm talking their job description, which could be a reduction in their pay. So I just want to say to everyone, like, this is hurting our schools. This is affecting our classrooms. Yes, some of our classes are larger because even with eliminating our vacancies, you still have positions that are not ever going to be filled. So to your point, Trustees Zamora, some of our classrooms are larger. That is correct. And I'm sorry, I had to ask the central office. I've done both sides. I was a central office administrator. I was a site building administrator. And when you say that there's no positions that are being maybe vacated out of central or hit, it is an optics that our schools absorb this, okay? So I want to go back to the document because I really think it was helpful. And I sent these questions ahead of time to the personnel so that there would be no surprise. So I'm asking about the calculation. When doing the math on page 8, I really want to get into the hourly rate. It's on page 8. The question was, determine the average base salary by averaging the estimated annual rate, which is the sum of the adjusted. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. But the question that I have is, in the calculations for the site-based licensed staff, you're using $39 an hour, which is an average hourly base rate, correct? Is that correct? So I'm having trouble because here's, Diane, teachers are contracted 184 days per year, and they work 7 hours and 11 minutes per day. So if you multiply that by their hourly rate, it does not come out to $81,438.33. So can you just explain that? Because that threw me off.
Madam President, members of the board, if I may, Trustees Esparza-Stafford and Kelly Kowal-Paul for the record. I think the report that you're referring to outside of the response to the state superintendent is the average salary report that we have posted on Open Book, where it states the average hourly rate is $39. That average hourly rate is based on a 2,088-hour work year, which is an illustration of the fact that we pay teachers as a full FTE. It's an accounting exercise. The figure, that $39 excludes fringe, but that is if you took their total salary, divided it by 2,088 hours, that's where you get to the 39. If you were to calculate the average hourly rate based on the actual 7-hour, 11-minute contract, you would get closer to about $62 per hour, excluding benefits.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Guzman?
Thank you. I'm gonna go back to talk about the committee that's put together. Paul from White Pine, Tom Shizinski, I think I said that correctly, and then our past CFO. May I ask, because I went to the Council of Great City Schools last week, and I did some digging on the budget and their assistance. And so my question is, will these folks be helping you with systems the way that the council would have? Or is this something completely different?
Madam President, members of the board, for the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell, Trustee Guzman. This subcommittee was assigned to us yesterday, so I'm not quite sure what it will entail. I don't know if they'll be spending 3 or 4 days with us in a row like the council was, but it was, these 3 gentlemen were assigned to work with us on a subcommittee and then for them to report back with us at an upcoming meeting. So we're excited to work with them, but I don't have the details of what it looks like at this point in time.
Okay, great. And I have one other question, and it has to do with HR. From what I remember from last year, HR went through a huge surplus. It could have been last year or the year before, but I feel like central office went through a huge surplus when we did reclassification, and folks were moved around. Am I not remembering that correctly? I just feel like there were changes made because, and a huge, maybe, and also IT, didn't we just go through a surplus with IT? I just, are they not considered central office? I'm trying to understand what central office is versus school-based surplus.
Okay. Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Dr. Larson Mitchell, Roanne Triana, for the record, those IT people that were surplus in the spring were not considered central.
Okay.
We take central as like central office administration. That's more IT. And so those are supports. They were included in the support professional numbers.
Okay, so support professionals are not considered central office? I'm trying to understand because support professionals work in the central office. Am I wrong?
Members of the board, Madam President, Superintendent Dr. Larson Mitchell, Roanne Triana, for the record, those site-based technicians, for example, work in schools, right? So it's a big spread of IT type people that service schools, they service departments, but right now they're not technically considered. When we ask about central office support, they were not included in that.
Thank you.
Madam, if I may add on to that, Madam President, members of the board, for the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell, Trustee Guzman, my understanding, adding on to site-based, there were also some central tech positions as well that were included in the surplus, was my understanding. Trustee Guzman.
Thank you. Trustee Zamora, you're up next.
Thank you, Madam President. I was trying to be quick because I'm on a timer, so sorry if it's just so blunt. Thank you, Trustee Guzman. Those were actually really good questions. I think clarification of the words that we use too is very important, right? Even the surplus. And so I appreciate that. I know at the last meeting, Trustee Satori was trying to be proactive and seeing if we can possibly send that presentation to principals just because the presentation was given and, you know, they can have it. Did that ever happen?
Madam President, members of the board, for the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell, I don't believe it was directly sent to principals.
Okay. So did you specifically get any response possibly from principals about that presentation?
Madam President, members of the board, for the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell, Trustee Zamora, yes, I did receive some comments regarding the presentation. They thought it was very clear, very straightforward, and appreciated the solution focused.
And I'm curious to see if there was any clarifying questions that other admins had that we possibly didn't ask, that you were able to clarify through messaging back to them.
Madam President, members of the board, for the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell, Trustee Zamora, I would say that most of the clarifying questions, comments that we've received from school-based administrators has come through our extended leadership team and also principal leads and the budget committee where we're working with principals.
Okay, just trying to see how we also improve the presentation, right? If there was something that was really popular, a question that kept coming up from admins in schools. And then as we're talking about supporting documents, is Open Books being updated?
Madam President, members of the board, for the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell, Trustee Zamora, we have updated Open Books as we have discovered inaccuracies. We have made updates to Open Book.
Okay, I'm wondering if there is proactive, I'm always trying to think proactively, right? If we can, maybe, I was on the website and seeing if there's a space that we can put like up-to-date budget issues, right? Or up-to-date budget updates, something like that, but that's on the top of it so people don't really, because I was looking at the way the website is and it's a little difficult to navigate through, right? So how do we make it a little bit easier for folks who are interested in going in a deep dive about this, kind of saying like, here is up-to-date stuff. This last update was, 2 days ago or whatever. So we're being fully transparent.
Madam President, members of the board, for the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell, Trustee Zamora, great suggestion. There's a lot of information there, and there are ways that we could flag what's been updated or what is new. Thank you.
Thank you. Turn it over to Trustee Cavazos.
Thank you, Madam President. Most of my questions have been answered, so I just have a couple of short ones here. Just to clarify, user support people who work at Central, not at schools, are not considered Central. I just wanted to clarify that for a constituent.
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Dr. Larson Mitchell, she's going to get her fingers on the button.
Madam President, members of the board, for the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell. So the spring surplus TIS, there were central positions, there were 26, and all were placed.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
The other constituent question, and pretty sure I know the answer to this already. You have on page 4 of 13, and happy to see that 31 of the requests that were submitted, to support principals who were severely impacted were approved. And there were only one, if I got that correct, there was only one that was not approved. So without, having to name schools or anything, it says that it was not approved because they did not have significant challenges. So could you give me an example? It doesn't have to be specifically from there, but what was not considered a significant challenge?
Madam President, members of the board, for the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell, Trustee Cavazos. Madam President, with your permission, I'll have Ms. Gutierrez respond. Thank you.
Yeah.
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Melissa Gutierrez, for the record, Trustee Cavazos. Some schools were able to balance their budgets without making reductions in staff.
Mm-hmm. So that basically was the bottom line for the decision.
There were requests that were made, so depending on what principals and their SOTs decided they wanted to request, that was the basis for what they submitted. The decision to not fund one school that you are referring to, that school did not have any challenges balancing their budget and closing it. They were just looking for additional funding for staff, not to keep the staff they had.
Okay, and I did read the supporting documentation, but it was a constituent question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Trustee Baron?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam President. I'm really happy the way the state, the governor's office, the legislature worked with Clark County School District to help us close the gap with the number of vacancies that we had. Went from 1,500 down to to 700, which is still pretty serious, but I'm very happy that we're there. But if I recall the way governments work, right, those positions, even though they weren't filled, they weren't staffed, right, they were definitely funded. So I'm looking here at the 700, and at first, I guess at the beginning of the year, it was reported to be 1,000. But even if it's only like right now, 700 funded but vacant positions, and even if we take it at the erroneous number of $115,000, right, that should have been 80,500,000 that's sitting in school budgets somewhere. So how did that play into all this to plug the holes? I mean, if we have $80 million that, again, has already been funded but hasn't been expended, again, these numbers, I don't understand whether we have a $50 million hole, a $20 million hole, a $10 million hole. How does... Where's the money? Where was it used? Was it used to plug holes? How does that work?
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Kelly Cole-Paul for the record. Trustee Barone, we are unable to utilize school staff budgeted funds to facilitate central office budget balancing. This is something that the legislature has mandated in law for the Clark County School District. It is not something that any other school district that I'm aware of is restricted from doing. In fact, I think that's the most common way school districts balance their budget is by using unspent budgeted funds for positions that were not filled. The current vacancies in school-based positions will become carry-forward dollars that schools will carry forward into their budgets for next year. So that is not; those are not dollars that we can utilize to impact the central office potential deficit, which is why that's not one of the recommendations that we will be bringing forward. Is that clear? Good.
I'll go back. I'll get on the queue for another question.
Trustee Sparza-Strophigan.
Thank you. So I want to look at page 9 of 13. Give you guys a second to get there. If you go down past the bullets on item 15, there's a line that says the district was unable to predict the principal's use of carry forward dollars in anticipation of the 24-25 school year. So because now we know we have to do better, what are we doing to track anything that has been encumbered or things that people have planned for with their carryover funds? Do we have a tracking system for that?
Madam President, members of the board, Kelly Cole-Paul for the record. Trustee Sparza-Strophigan, that's one of the issues that we're tracking and that we're collecting recommendations for from the team to make sure we can improve for next year.
So, I mean, I'm going to put an ask because I think that's important that we start really utilizing a tracker to identify that. And I want to go to an example because I also, Trustee Zamora, jumped into the open book and I was lost. It was very tricky. I think we need to do better with that in getting access. So I went to Lundy Elementary School. I went to see their carry forward fund. They have $500,000 in their carry forward. And I don't know if that's accurate because like you just said, Interim Superintendent, maybe it's not accurate right now, but that's what it says. It's out there in public facing. So I'm just wondering if that money is there. We know that the legislator passed a bill that said you cannot carry over more than 5% because if they don't spend it down within 2 years, only 5% of that will come back. So I'm wondering if that school is even aware that that money's there because the SOT has to have say on how that carryover should be spent. So that's just things I'm thinking about that people aren't aware of and schools need to start planning now because that's something that, you know, they should have decision making in that. And you know that because you're part of that process.
Madam President, members of the board, Kelly Cole-Paul for the record. Trustee Sparza-Strophigan, I want to assure you that we've been communicating with principals for a couple of years, that they will be required to meet the requirements of that law regarding carry forward. They are all very, very aware. It's also in the guidance that's provided to SOTs each year. Also, important to consider is that part of our recommendations that we're looking at are ways to ease the principal's ability to track the expenditure of those carry forward dollars year to year, so that they can make sure that they are able to invest the dollars in our kids before we lose it.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Trustee Barron.
Yeah, my last couple of questions. So as I understand, there were 31 schools that requested some help to balance out. And that came up to about, what, 7.7 million? Well, where did those funds come from then?
Madam President, members of the board, Trustee Barone, Kelly Kowal-Paul for the record, those dollars came out of central office. What we are doing is trying to make use of unspent grant funds. Some in ESSER 3 are federal pandemic relief dollars. We're also looking at some other federal relief dollars we received through the state. So what we're trying to do is identify costs that were applied to those grants that can be applied to statutory reserve funds, which have a very narrow criteria for allowable costs, which will allow us to free up expenditures from general fund and apply those expenditures to grant. So basically, we use grant funds to pay for things that are allowable in the grant, which will free up central office dollars to allow us to provide that additional support to schools.
Okay. You'll have to excuse my skepticism here. Again, we're throwing big numbers around. I ask a simple question: how do we get from $50 million deficit to 20 to 12 to 10? Still don't have an answer, and I don't have any documentation on that. But what I'm hearing here, I guess, for the record, did we or did we not have a deficit here? We hear $50 million, hey, and a lot of teachers were going crazy, and I fielded questions from people who had left jobs to come here to school. They were worried that they were going to lose their jobs. We heard of so many programs that would be proposed to be cut here. But from what I'm hearing here, everything sounds like everything's all rosy. I guess we never did have a budget deficit then for the schools, only for the central office. Is that what I'm being told?
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Kelly Kowal-Paul again for the record. Trustee Barone, there is no actual budget deficit until the budget work is complete. What we've been communicating is our best estimate while the budget work is not done. That's not something we typically communicate early. We've been asked a lot of questions that I agree with Trustee Bustamante Adams are making us think very strongly about the way we work and making us better, for sure. But some of the consequences of those extra communications are pieces of information that are incomplete, being shared publicly, that are not final. So when we saw a potential budget deficit at 50 million, we had not yet discovered perhaps some remaining funds in line items in whatever budget that the budget team had not yet reconciled. So as they continue to go line by line, which is what they're doing, and go, oh, there's leftover funds here, oh, there's leftover funds here, we didn't spend this here, we can move this to a grant. All those changes that they find as they continue to reconcile the budget continue to chip away at what was a potential larger central budget deficit is now 10. We'll probably be able to cover the final deficit by adjusting the ending fund balance, which would in fact result in no deficit.
I turn it over to Trustee Cavazos, who is next. Trustee Cavazos, thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. And just kind of circling back, lots of questions about, carryover and understanding that, and about the teacher increases not being originally, included. So just to clarify, if a school did not have what would be characterized as a significant challenge, and they were able to balance their budgets, did they have to then ask for the 5,700? Did they not get that? Just trying to clear this up for the public.
Madam President, members of the board, Kelly Cole-Paul for the record, Trustee Cavazos. Because the way your question is stated, if the schools had to ask for the additional $5,700, I need to clarify again that schools were not under funded $5,700 per employee.
I apologize, Kelly. I worded it the way they asked me, so
I suspected as much. Yeah, thank you. But it's worth clarifying anyway, since the question's coming in. Schools were not underfunded $5,700 per position. They were informed that a licensed position was $5,700 lower than it actually is. So if you could imagine being budgeting for some pens, and we tell schools, you need to buy pens, and pens cost $15. Right. And then you build a budget, and you say, I can buy so many pens because they cost $15. But then we go, oh, wait, they actually cost $20. Then you have to go, oh, I can't afford as many pens. That's basically what has happened, only at a larger scale, of course, and with greater impact.
Okay, and what we wanted, and what they, I think, needed to hear is that they were not underfunded, correct?
Not as a result of that salary issue, no.
All right, thank you so much.
Trustee Sparsa-Strofigan?
I really am curious about, because I think a part of this loop is that in the past, principals were able to kind of make their own budget. And they could use spreadsheets like the old school, right? Now we move to a digital system which does calculations, and then you have analysts that maybe don't have understanding instructionally how that budget's being built. So what I appreciate is you're getting back to the people in the building that need to build that budget. So my question, their recommendations, what were some of those recommendations?
Madam President, members of the board, for the record, Brenda Larson-Mitchell, Trustee Esparza-Strofigan. We heard from principals that they want more professional learning on the budget. We heard from them they want a technical manual. They want to know, how can I predict what my at-risk funding may be? They want to learn more about the grad score. They're very eager to learn. They want their assistant principals to have professional learning as well. So we have committed to those things, Trustee.
Thank you.
I'm going to go down the queue here. Trustee Barron?
Yes, thank you very much one more time. Again, maybe it's I don't understand that this full school budgeting thing, but I was under the impression that the fiscal year 24 had already been approved. But whenever you do the final reconciliation, I expect to see the documentation for the question that I'm asking for.
Madam President, members of the board, for the record, Brenda Larson-Mitchell, Trustee Barone, we will be bringing that to the board in a presentation on December 12th.
Thank you, Interim Superintendent.
May I add, pretty please, Madam President, members of the board, so just know FY24, the financials will be presented November 14th. The budget, AFB, will be presented December 12th. So there are two different things. I'm not sure what you were asking. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, Trustee Brooks?
Thank you, Madam President. Could you remind me, so the actuals, you're closing your books, the actuals expense, what was the difference between the budget and actuals in totality? Like how much difference was there in those two numbers?
So, Madam President, members of the board, Diane Bartholomew for the record, you're asking for basically our ending fund balance.
Yes.
Which is the difference between
Yes.
those items that you were just mentioning.
How much does that represent of the budget?
So are you looking for a dollar amount or a percentage?
Percentage.
Okay, so we currently, so for FY '24, we budgeted for 4.5% for FY '24. We're doing the same for FY '25 budget. We're trying to keep it at 4.5 of unassigned ending fund balance of revenue. So you had brought up the NAC and the NRS. You know, the NRS is based on percentage of expenditure, and it's for ending fund balance, where our 3110 is based on unassigned, and it's based on revenue. So yes, we're trying to keep AFB 2025 at 4%, 4.5%. As Ms. Cole-Powell was mentioning, we may need to use a fraction of that maybe to balance, but we should be over 4%.
Thank you. I think I was a little unclear.
Sorry.
It's no, I apologize. It's my wording was a little unclear. So of the deficit of $10 million, what percentage of the district's budget does that represent?
Madam President, members of the board, Diane Bartholomew, for the record, a very small percent, maybe 0.001, right? We have a $4 billion general operating, so $10 million is a fraction of that, obviously.
Okay, and sometimes, is it possible that this works in reverse? The district is, point whatever percent under, and there's a surplus? And if so, what happens to that surplus?
Madam President, members of the board, Diane Bartholomew, for the record, it becomes part of our ending fund balance.
Okay, so it's really similar, right? That's why there's an ending fund balance, because sometimes you have to make allowances for things like this, and I think it's important that public understands that sometimes it also works in reverse, and I don't know that you get as much help from people externally when you're, 0.3 off and it's in your favor.
All right, colleagues, let's round this out. We have 3 more members in the queue, and then I'd like to provide some closing remarks. Trustee Zamora, this is your last chance. Let's go.
Thank you, Madam President. Interim Superintendent Brenda Larson-Mitchell, you mentioned that admin has a taste and a hunger to learn more about the budget, right? I'm really excited to hear that, and I know with Kelly during our briefing, I don't know, weeks ago, we talked about SOT and involving them. I'm wondering if simultaneously, as you're working on some type of a learning for admin, if there's something to include for SOTs, licensed parents, and anyone who's part of the SOT.
Madam President, members of the board, Kelly Howell-Paul for the record, Trustee Zamora, there's always room for that. We revise the SOT training annually, send it to the state, the Department of Ed for approval. I'm sure they would be more than happy to see a little bit of extra budget detail in there. And really, like I said a couple of weeks ago sitting here, although the very short-term goal of our process improvement work is to prepare for January 2025 budget release, my overarching goal is to broaden and deepen our understanding of how funds are allocated to the district and throughout our system. And I would love for that broader and deeper understanding to be felt by all of our stakeholders.
Thank you, Kelly. And I trust that you're as passionate about this because I know we've bonded about SOTs and how important they are. It's just unfortunate that we had to go through this process, right? Because I did talk to SOT members and they were just confused, I think worried more than anything, and just how do we fix that? How do we move into a better space with that? So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Zamora. Trustee Esparza-Stroffigan?
So I had some of the administrators share with me that they had to go into general supplies. So the same process that you did for appealing to fix the shortfall, will that still be an offering that I would hate for a school to not have a supply during the year if they come to that, because they can't predict some things that they're going to need. So will there be a process for that, for them to be able to have resources before the school year's over?
Madam President, members of the board, for the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell, trustee Esparza Stroffigan. We have typically not had the appeal process beyond when budgets need to be submitted. Of course, if there's a school in extreme need, they can always reach out to their principal supervisor and we can problem solve.
Thank you for that. Because I see on the news, kids don't have homework because they don't have paper. So I know there's a lot of layers to that. So I think it's just the key thing that I appreciate this team is that you guys are owning the situation. Thank you for being true leaders. Thank you for being transparent. And thank you for really trying to make it better. And I just, as a last two things, wanting to know where the surplus process, when it's complete, how everyone lands and how that is going to unfold, just to have that as a final report for all of us. And then, of course, I already mentioned open book needs to be revised so that it's really friendly and not so cumbersome. Thank you.
Trustee Bustamante Adams?
Thank you, Madam President. And I am grateful. I know the statement was made earlier by Trustee Barron that we are making progress in moving the gap between the licensed teachers being in the classroom. So thank you to our HR team. My question is for our interim CFO. So you mentioned that our goal for FY 2025 would be to keep it at 4.5%. NRS says it's 4%. Is that accurate, or is it 4.2?
Madam President, members of the board, Diane Bartholomew, yes, the NRS is 4%. Our reg is 2%.
Okay.
And I hope I said that the right way. Yes.
Our reg is 2%. And so when if we're going to use the ending fund balance to be able to maybe fill the gap, then how do we go and generate more revenue somewhere? How does that work?
Madam President, members of the board, Diane Bartholomew, for the record. So you mean, no, we're not going to generate more revenue. We're going to get in what we can, right? Whatever the state, we get revenue in from several sources. But the making up the 4.5% is just the difference between, our expenses and our revenue. So I'm not sure.
Maybe I'm not asking it correctly, yeah. But I just know that, right, if we use some of the, after we do the budget versus actuals, there's an amount we might take from that amount. Yes. So how are we going to make up that difference the following year? And that may be a deeper question. I know I'm trying to understand the budget, but I don't know how that gets refilled, if that's the right word.
Madam President, members of the board, yes, you're asking a very good question. So we are going into a legislative session. So, we're hoping we do okay with the legislative session. That's why we have our lobbyists, why we go up there to fight for every dollar we can get. And that's what we do. So
okay.
Depends on negotiations, depends on a lot of pieces, right?
Okay. Starting to make sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Curiosity, how does the schools, just along these lines, that doesn't necessarily have to do with the update, but along the lines of funding, where does CCSD have its own ability to generate funds on its own, like other school districts across the country?
Madam President, members of the board, Diane Bartholomew, for the record, we don't. If we're generating money, it's usually at the school level, right? They're having maybe a fundraiser, but that's all part of their school-generated funds. Centrally, I could have a car wash if you want, but no, there's not a mechanism centrally for the district to raise money. We're reliant on the legislature and grants for our funding.
And that's just
we're not a taxing entity. So
that's thank you for that. Okay. So, and not being a taxing entity means that we're not able to raise taxes at the local level, which would mean additional revenue. So as a result, we are really just beholden to however the legislature budgets resources for school systems, I think it's an important thing to note. In other districts across the country, school districts have their own ability to make changes to their, to generate resources of funding by changing tax at the local level, charging tax at the local level that would benefit students and families. Quite great. Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to take a moment to acknowledge Dr. Larson Mitchell and your team and the people who are here in front of us today, but also the many people who worked very, very diligently to prepare for presentations, to write out presentations, to anything and everything that had to do with the budget. Thank you for owning this from day one. Thank you for making, I want to really acknowledge you and your team for making progress and strides towards ensuring that the learnings that take place do not go in vain, and really ensuring that we continue to be stronger as a system, and really just acknowledge the strength and the courage it takes to stand before a body to share what concerns have come before us. And I don't know many people who have the strength and the courage to be before a body, to be to have to answer questions that are to have a degree of legal scrutiny that has existed. So thank you for your willingness to just continue to put the work forward and focus on our kids on behalf of our children and our families. Incredibly grateful for the work that's taking place here. Thank you. Great. Colleagues, we're going to now move on to public comment on items not listed as action items on the agenda. This is an opportunity for members of the public to provide public comment. We have individuals who signed up in advance and some members who've submitted yellow public speaker cards. If you would like to provide public comment on items, please submit your yellow public speaker card. Otherwise, once we begin, we will no longer take yellow cards. Colleagues, with your permission, I see Mr. Jones is here. He did not have a chance to provide public comment during consent agenda items. With your permission, may I ask him if he can do public comment now at this time? Mr. Jones, you want to come on up? You'll be first in line, followed by Misty Olmos and Jan Giles.
Hello, everyone. And I'm Dr. Mitchell. Hello, how you doing? One of my concerns is we have a lot of parents here that can be at home doing things with their kids. We need to start using this time more valuable. Things that we just discussed, it should be done some other time. We need to be more concerned about our school, about the kids. One of my questions is the students failing, or we failing the kids? That's what we need to be more concerned about. We waste more time. I just sat here for an hour and 45 minutes, listening to something that we never got an answer on. You guys are study asking the same question, never got an answer. I'm hoping this next board that come up, that get elected, have enough consideration to understand you have parents that have kids. These things that you guys are discussing about the budget and everything else, do that on your time. But bring it, the real stuff, to the parents that want to know what's going on. But we need to concentrate more on these schools. We still rank 48th. And we're talking about we don't have money. Barone asked a question, never got an answer. That's an embarrassment. If kids are not failing, we're failing the kids. That's what we need to concentrate on. I looked at the thing as far as expulsion of our kids. And it's an embarrassment to look up and see most of the kids that's black and brown are being suspended at the schools that's in our areas. The 89106, the 89030s, the 89031s. Let's find a better way that we don't have to suspend these kids and work with the kids. That's what we need to be concentrating on. We need staffing. That's what we need to concentrate on. There's other things that we need to be doing other than discussing a budget when people can be at home with their kids. You're having a meeting at 5 o'clock. Here it is at 6:45. Really, let's get serious about this. We're failing our kids. Thank you.
Is Misty present? Misty, come on. Yep. Followed by Jan Giles and Angie Joy.
No. Yes. Timer. Good evening, President Garcia Morales and trustees. My name is Misty Olmos. I have worked in CCSD for 17 years as a paraeducator, and I am also the Secretary-Treasurer of ESCA. My work at CCSD has been with our most vulnerable students. Tonight, many of us are asking for the trustees to get involved with the numerous safety issues that are facing our support staff and vulnerable students at CCSD. During my employment, I have been hit, scratched, spit, bitten, and have had to restrain students that were doing harm to themselves and others, and I am not alone in this. Myself and my colleagues have reached out to numerous departments like risk management, school police, and SSD. Unfortunately, the district does not have the resources to provide an adequate solution to help with these matters. Excuse me. We have parents pulling their students out of schools just because we can't keep them safe enough. And unfortunately, we are losing support staff left and right due to the lack of training and lack of living wages. I love what I do, and I know that CCSD can do better, but we are not trained enough to provide the skills that are required to keep us all safe, and we need help. Support employees are not providing ongoing training and education that CCSD should be providing to all employees. In fact, they are often thrown in classrooms with zero training and often no real knowledge of what the job is. We all love the students and are being pushed out of education because we cannot continue to survive like this and must find something safer and more dependable. Recently, parents filed a class action calling on the district to provide proper education to our special needs students. I can tell you our special needs classrooms are not properly staffed. CCSD administrations have been aware of the need to support our employees in these rooms. The revolving door of support staff in these classrooms continue due to the lack of support. I am just one of thousands of support professionals who want to see better for our students and profession. It does no good for our students if we continue the revolving door at CCSD. I am asking for CCSD to implement a true safety committee with representatives from appropriate jobs families at CCSD. The safety committee should be appropriate funded and time to meet with quarterly reports to trustees for outcomes and action items. Thank you.
Jan, followed by Angie, and then Theodore Schwartz.
Good evening, President Garcia Morales, Superintendent Dr. Brenda Larson Mitchell, and trustees. For the record, I am Jan Giles, President of ESEA. ESEA represents over 8,000 support professionals at CCSD. Tonight, I'd like to bring to your attention Article 34-1 of the CCSD ESEA Negotiated Agreement. It states, the district will provide safe, healthy working conditions for all employees. I come before you on behalf of the dedicated support professionals that are working in unsafe environments. In our positions, we are often the first in the line of defense for school fights, weapon confiscations, working outside our job classification to cover vacancies, working off district property, sustaining injuries, working with special needs students, and providing care. In these positions, support professionals are often punched, bitten, spit upon, scratched, and sworn at. Support professionals know our risks of our jobs, but per the contract, we expect our employer, CCSD, to ensure procedures and staffing is in place to minimize the risks. Instead, staff shortages, lack of proper training and protocols, administrative disregards, and retaliation to employees that report safety issues is continuing our members at risk and ultimately the students. Tonight, I'm asking for you to get involved and demand that CCSD keep everyone safe. ESEA has requested multiple times that CCSD implement the required safety advisory group per Article 34-7 of our contract. These requests have gone unanswered. ESEA is requesting again that this safety advisory group to start meeting monthly. The group should provide monthly reports on safety issues and incidents to the trustees. I look forward to ESEA being an active participant in making CCSD safe for
safe for employees and students. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Angie present? Followed by Theodore. Theodore present. And then Sharon Roth.
Good evening, trustees. My name is Angie Joy, and I'm a first grade teacher at Mountain View Elementary School, and I'm here today to voice concern over the continuing budget questions that remain unanswered. The responses to the follow-up questions from Joni Ebert is far from building clarity. It creates more questions in all of our minds. This is frustrating and infuriating as an educator for a number of reasons. 2 years ago, I was a part of a group of CCSD educators that went to Carson City and lobbied for funds that would come to our district, and now to see how poorly it has been managed with no accountability. It has been shocking, but not surprising, if that makes sense. I was a part of the negotiations team representing CCEA, and I remember vividly when CCSD's negotiation team came in unprepared several times and could not produce numbers of staff. Numbers such as the number of licensed teachers in different positions, the cost of that licensed personnel. I feel like that same indifference that caused negotiations to go on for 10 long months is the same sort of indifference that is being paid to the budget. At what point is I don't know and I'm not sure not good enough? The follow-up response is confusing and lacking a lot of details, especially regarding the discrepancy around that $5,700. Question 11 asks about the average cost of a teacher and a substitute. A cost was given for a teacher, but not for a sub, because the district does not produce an average salary for a sub. Yet, then number 13, the budgeted salary versus the actual salary for the sub is referenced. Number 12, from my understanding, was asking for figures, as in numbers, to identify the discrepancies in the estimated strategic budgets released in January and the budgets released in September 2024. Easy opportunity to enhance the answer with the actual budgetary numbers, but instead you get sentence fragments referencing the categories from which actual numbers should come from. Number 14 asks about negative carryover dollars and asks for a calculation to be included, but none is given. The response to question 10 says that principals should have been notified in the spring regarding the fall school budget tool, but later in response to 21, it says they were notified. No date is given as to when. Further in 22, it says some dates in September. At least 8 of the 22 questions have the cut and paste answer, insufficient process documentation and communication, and organization and process silos. Does that clear up a lot for you? Because it does not clear up a lot for me. Then it finishes out with the line that no school budgets have been impacted by the potential central office deficit, and I find that to be false. I've talked to SOT members that keep seeing changing budgets without sufficient answers, and just today I asked my admin if there was money for our first graders to get a bus for a field trip in November to a horse farm. Would you like to guess what I was told? No, because of the budget issues. The budget isn't settled, so not now, but most likely in the spring when the budget is accurately updated. To me, that's proof that school budgets are being impacted.
Thank you. Theodore? Is Theodore present? No, okay. Sharon Roth? No. Ed Gonzalez? Okay. Move on to, oh, hey. I'm sorry, you're good. Then we'll go to Kenny Belknap.
Thank you, Madam President, Superintendent Brenda Larson Mitchell, members of the board. For the record, my name is Ed Gonzalez. You will hear me not say I'm a member of the Hickey SOT. I'm not speaking on the SOT. And I'm in the weird part of October where I'm not actually on the team because our team meets on Monday and I have to be voted on. So I have to go through the same process of explaining my qualifications and trying to win an election later on. But the reason I came here today is on the budget, when I signed up, it was for budget. But I'm actually not going to talk much about the budget because we've had a lot of conversations. You've had 2 meetings onto it, as you saw me walk in a bit later in the day. I don't think it's appropriate when you don't have all the information to comment on the budget. So while I do have some opinions on stuff, I don't think it's the appropriate form at this time to say a comment in public unless you heard all the conversations, gone through the questions that the superintendent had sent out. So I just want to make that clear onto it. But what I do want to talk about is that we've had a lot of people looking into this. When I was at the State Board of Education meeting, I asked them to have their AB 469 subcommittee come meet. I'm asking this body to do the same thing on their AB 469 subcommittee. I think it's important for this board to have more of a process if you feel like it's necessary. The issue is that The members on that committee will be leaving shortly from the board, and we have one who has resigned. And so I think as you look into that possibility, if you choose to do so, I would actually ask this body to, if you're going to do that, to look at two people that I would recommend to sit on to it. One of them would be Trustee Irene Bustamante Adams. She was a legislator when we voted for both AB 394 and 469. So she does have an understanding of what the legislature was talking about when we had it during that time. The second one I would actually ask would be, because this body is much different than when you formed it, you have appointed members. I would ask for Trustee Ramona Esperanza Esofagran to sit on it too. She was a principal at Valley. In fact, I had the pleasure a couple of times actually attending her SOT meetings, and I was always generally surprised because she had a student chair. So I can tell you could explain at that time, the Zoom victory, and I don't know if we had SB 178 at that moment, but I was surprised how well they can explain it more than the average public. So I do think if that's something this body wants to do, to get more into some details and look at more policies. That's the main reason I come by. Our SOT, who I'm not speaking for, has been active in making recommendations, so I do appreciate Dr. Brenda Larson-Mitchell's response to it. We make recommendations. If you're welcome, I saw a little bit of the presentation. If you're looking for recommendations, I mean, we could always make more, but that's up to the school organizational team, which I am not speaking on at this time. But that being said, that's the only reason I came here to speak, to recommend or suggest that you may want to look at having your own subcommittee reformed. Thank you.
Kenny, followed by Jason Gatsby. Gately.
Good evening, School Board of Trustees. My name is Kenny Belknap. I am a social studies teacher at Liberty High School, and I also serve as the vice president of the Clark County Education Association. I'm speaking tonight about this budget crisis that our district has been facing. Since there was a budget shortfall reported last month, the public, state lawmakers, and governor have been asking the same question. How did this happen? How did this happen when we have received more funding than in the history of this district? And when pressed for answers by the Department of Education, state lawmakers, or the governor, CCSD has listed off a number of reasons, whether it's a miscalculation of at-risk funds, they didn't project accurately the new cost of educators, overspent on legal fees, or cybersecurity issues. But what's been absent in all of this discourse is the cause. What caused these miscalculations? It comes down to mismanagement, plain and simple. Since this whole issue has began, Larson-Mitchell has overseen this district for months now. She's the one that presented this budget to you, riddled with holes and riddled with a deficit. This is her mess, and we urge you all to get to the bottom of how this happened. When pressed, or when the questions that we've heard referenced several times already, when BLM was asked by State Superintendent Joan Ebert if the errors were foreseeable or preventable and responded with, in her words, not mine, in my opinion, the errors in the budget preparation were not foreseeable because they were caused by mistakes. However, the mistakes were preventable. In my opinion, the mistakes were a result of insufficient process documentation and communication and organization and process silos. The mistakes were not acceptable and should not have occurred. How does that make sense? How is that an acceptable answer to give? And how can the state, public, and the governor's office have any confidence that this isn't going to happen again? I do believe that some of you up there do want to get to the bottom of this, and I want to give you kudos and urge you to continue finding answers from the interim superintendent and not whatever word salad she throws out there, like that response to the state superintendent. It's also very clear there's some of you on this board more than willing to accept her non-answers and sweep this whole situation under the rug, which is unacceptable and will only continue to erode trust in our system. In February, the legislative session opens. If this board just accepts these non-answers, and there is no telling what steps the state might take to bring accountability to the Clark County School District. In 2023, CCEA broke with then Superintendent Jara because he was a liability in Carson. He had shown that he could not improve CCSD and made it hard for lawmakers and the governor to trust any investment made by the state would be put to good use. So I'm going to leave you with this one question. With what's transpired over the last month, do you think the state, the governor, or lawmakers will have any trust in us when the session opens up in February? Our students deserve better.
Jason, are you Jason? Jason. Nope, no, Jason. Jason, come on down, please, followed by Jenna Robertson.
For the record, my name is Jason Gately, representative with Teamsters Local 14, in partnership with the ESEA. I'm going to read a letter that we sent to the trustees. Good evening, trustees. Going to read a letter that was sent to you the previous week. We're writing to express a serious concern regarding the safety and well-being of students and employees at Western High School, specifically related to the conduct of the school's principal. The principal is instructing staff to leave property to perform work on private property, including painting over graffiti placed by gangs, often referred to as tagging crews. This puts staff in significant risk, as evidenced by one encounter where where a staff was confronted by the gang that had done the graffiti. The principal's directive was in clear violation of the workers' scope of work and places both employees and students in a dangerous environment. It is not appropriate for principals of any school or any school official to send employees off school grounds to perform duties unrelated to their contracted responsibilities, especially in high-risk situations like these. The issue has already been grieved and through the proper channel. However, the EMR and the Department of CCSD has denied the grievance. EMR's stance, which condones placing workers in harm's way, is alarming and completely unacceptable. It is our belief that every CCSD employee deserves a safe and secure environment, free from unnecessary risks. We believe the Board of Trustees should take action in the same position. We urge the Board of Trustees to take immediate action to rectify this situation and ensure that CCSD employees is not subjected to unsafe directives and working conditions in the future. The forced painting over of graffiti by custodians and the direction of the principal is not only placing workers in harm's way, it may also place students at Western High School at risk from retribution from these tagging crews. Failure to address this matter promptly will leave us no choice but to initiate a public awareness campaign. This campaign will jointly be done by ESEA and Teamsters Local 14. We will also seek assistance from other labor organizations and partners bringing awareness to these unlawful and dangerous actions by CCSD, Western High School, and the principal. The campaign will include bannering, leafleting, and other forms of communication directly to the public to make awareness of the safety violations. Thank you for your time.
Is Jenna present? Come on up.
President Garcia Morales, members of the board, Superintendent, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell. I am Jenna Robertson, for the record, mom of 5. I have never been, my 5 kids have a 10-year spread. 10 years for 5 kids. I was a foster parent. I had multiple infants, newborns, babies, toddlers, all at one time. 5 in diapers at once as a foster parent. I have never been more tired than I have been the past 3 months since becoming a full-time vacancy sub in one of your elementary schools. I'm exhausted. Your meetings are long. I know you do important things. I really hope that you'll take the time to listen to teachers and to meet them where they are, because I came here tonight after working late at school, decided, oh, there's a board meeting. Let's check out what's on the agenda. I'm a fairly aware parent. I have not seen one meeting in person since the school year started. I'm tired, and I'm just a sub. I wasn't going to make any comment until President Garcia Morales' last comment to the staff that presented here, and your last comments were to thank them for their bravery for facing questions about the budget. You know, I appreciate what y'all do. I really appreciate you, Superintendent. I do. That's not bravery. That's doing their job. Your teachers are brave. Your subs are brave. We get no training for things like special needs kids, higher needs behaviors. We get no training for things like that. Your subs are so undervalued and underappreciated in this district, not only by the board, not only by the board, by other teachers, they're undervalued. If you don't like what subs do in your classroom, don't ask for us. We're going to go where we're valued. It's not the most it's not the classroom that pays me the most that I'm going to go to. I'm going to go where somebody says, thank you. Thank you for being here today. I don't need a Starbucks gift card. Nice, I'm going to spend it. I'm not going to tell you. But I don't need that. I need somebody to tell me where the bathroom is. Where can I go to the bathroom on my break? When is my break? Thank you for taking the time, to every teacher who writes those things down. I wasn't going to say a word. I appreciate what you do. I appreciate what these people do. And it can't be easy to face these questions. I get it. That's not bravery. They're doing their job. And I hope that they're doing it very well. I hope we get answers soon. I know you all want answers too. I do. But bravery is the teachers that are in your classroom every day. And bravery is the subs, not myself. I have a really fun job. I'm not going to say what it is because I have haters here, but I have a really fun job and I love what I do. I'm tired. I'm tired. Teachers are brave. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, our next upcoming meeting is Wednesday, here in the boardroom, October 30th at 9 a.m. I'm now seeking a motion to adjourn. Trustee Guzman?
I move to adjourn.
Thank you. Trustee Zamora?
I will second that motion.
Thank you. Colleagues, we have a motion by Trustee Guzman, a second by Trustee Zamora. Please cast your vote. Thank you, colleagues. That motion passes 6-0. The time is 7:10 p.m. Thank you.